So the first Tour de France that you covered was 2003, which was the Lance Armstrong era.
Yeah.
Earlier this year, he talked about the difference in attitudes of the modern era of men's pros compared to his era.
So I gather, yeah.
How do you think that the modern era compares to when you first started?
Well, I think there's been a paradigm shift in its propriety in how clean it is. I'm not going to sit here for a moment and suggest it's clean, because it's a human activity, and wherever humans are involved, the corners are going to be cut. You know, we're a bunch of prodigious cheats, really, aren't we? whether we're racing bikes or whether we're politicians or lawyers or accountants or whatever, you know, people cut corners. So that's one thing I should say. I'm not going to tell you it's clean. But what's changed since Armstrong is that those riders who do dope in the modern peloton are the outliers, and they are the risk takers who are fundamentally undermining the business model. Because sponsors now, you know, a doping positive for the sponsors who are involved in the sport now would be toxic.
Yes.
Deeply toxic. Going back to Armstrong's era, you can flip that on its head. There were clean riders in the Armstrong era, right? A guy I know very well is a really good case in point, British rider Roger Hammond of that era. Now, Roger, I firmly do believe was a completely clean rider. I trust him implicitly. You know, Roger was a very strong rider, should have had a much more lucrative and long and successful career on the road than he did. But his path was blocked by the fact that he was riding clean in an EPO-fueled era. And not only that, but Roger will tell you stories about sitting on a team bus, going to the start of a race, watching his teammates prepare, you know, in the worst sense of the word, for the race. And he himself was being put under enormous pressure to dope, to get with the program, because he was considered to be the unprofessional one who was risking everybody's livelihood by racing clean, not getting the results that the team need, not getting the results that the sponsor needed. Therefore, everybody's job is jeopardized and the financial model is broken. Unless you get with the program, you're not performing to the best of your ability. The whole thing falls apart. So those two generations are night and day, aren't they? There's a completely different economic model involved there that has had a very positive effect on the sport and how clean it is.
You're so right, and you make a good point. Like, having done our Tour de France podcast in the summer, ultimately there's been a lot of media speculation in the last couple of years about the dominance of people like Pogacar and Vingegaard. And last year it was Vingegaard's TT performance, which then, like in the Netflix documentary, there was talk of doping speculation. This year, Pogacar's times up climbs have been under scrutiny by the media. But you make such a good point. Like, it seems like it would be crazy. There's so much spotlight on them. And I don't know whether it's just a consequence of the fallout of the Armstrong era, or is it just sensationalism? People want to talk about doping.
No, I think it's a reasonable point, actually.
Okay.
I do, and I think it's a reasonable question to ask. You know, the history of cycling is sufficiently dirty for it to be a reasonable question to ask, and I think it's going to arise whether or not we like it. You know, and as soon as a dominant team or a dominant rider emerges from time to time, it's a legitimate question to ask. And the margins of victory for Pogacar this year across all terrains have been eye-watering, frankly. Added to that, and I will say this very clearly, absolutely no reason to suspect Tadej Pogacar, and I'm not suggesting that Tadej Pogacar, there's any wrongdoing in what he's doing. Just make that very clear. But what is indisputably the case is that there are one or two people associated with UAE Team Emirates who, in the backroom staff, who have got, to put it very mildly, a checkered past. Yeah, there are some associations in that team which are uncomfortable when you think about clean sport. I'll put it that way.
I think some of the problem with it is, as you said, there is a very long history of cycling being dirty one way or another. You only need to look back into the early days where they were literally just using amphetamines and just normal, what is now recreational drugs as stimulants. Yeah. You know, that was part of the foundations of it, but that arguably before they really knew that they were unhealthy and not necessarily good for you. But it kind of feels like if you map the technology in cycling and just in general, I think some of the reason that some people are still massive skeptics are technology is now so advanced that people don't even have an idea about what the cheating could be, but they just feel like there could be something. Like the Lance Armstrong days, it was literally blood doping. They were actually just putting blood in their bodies to make themselves better. Whereas now it feels like there's some kind of magic chemical or a concoction of chemicals that just makes someone better, but they go, well, what could it be? How could they do it?
Yeah, I mean, these rumours are gaining ground, aren't they? But as far as I'm concerned, and I've got my ear pretty close to the ground, not a shred of evidence as yet has been uncovered.
Yeah.
I think it's a tricky one, isn't it? It's an uncomfortable conversation to have, but I think it's legitimate, and I'm not going to kind of like decry people who... I mean, I think there's a lot of hysteria, and it's a slightly tiresome attitude across the board when any rider does anything that involves winning a bike race, they're automatically a doper. Is a little bit infantile, but
Yeah.
I mean, but I think it's fair. I think it's a fair question to ask. I do.
I hope it's clean, mostly because the main purpose of sport being clean is for the safety of riders. But I just really like where pro cycling is at the minute. I find it really exciting.
Yeah.
And I think people like riders like Pogacar, he's at a level that, yes, he wins lots, but I just find it very exciting to watch.
Yeah, I mean, if we're looking for reassurance, if we're looking for reasons to kind of like celebrate Pogacar in an unalloyed way, in a kind of just enjoy it sort of a way, then it is worth noting that across all sports, you will occasionally from time to time get absolute outliers. Lionel Messi is an incomparable footballer, and that I remember when in the aftermath of the London Olympics, after Usain Bolt's absolutely inevitable gold medal in the London Olympics, my friend, the late Richard Moore, the cycling journalist, wrote a fabulous book called The Bolt Supremacy, which involved him going over to Jamaica and finding out why Jamaican sprinters were quite as good and why Usain Bolt was was so head and shoulders different from, Pogacar-esque, if you like, in his absolute game-changing brilliance. And Richard, coming from the world of cycling, was pretty convinced going into writing that book that he would discover a doping network, and that would explain it. But actually, if you read the book, and I really urge you to do it, he went to Jamaica and found all sorts of other reasons why Jamaicans are brilliant, and Usain Bolt was a complete outlier. So that was kind of if you want reassurance, from time to time, figures will emerge who are just simply freaks. And the cleaner era, and David Miller, who did dope, and then reinvented himself, did come back and won bike races clean. So he's kind of quite a good person to talk to and hear from on this sort of subject. He'll say, a cleaner era allows freaks to be freaks.
Yeah.
It doesn't, it has unlevels the playing field. Doping levels the playing field.
Interesting. It's a very interesting way of looking at it.
It's quite an interesting way of looking at it, actually, isn't it? And Pogacar is a freak. He's mentally, he's kind of like different. He's just different gravy, isn't he? He's just kind of like what? Even he just can't help himself.
Yeah. And I think that's why I love him.
Yeah.
It's almost like he's so above everyone that he kind of goes, it's a bit boring sitting in the peloton.
Yeah, but let's not forget that prior to this year at the Tour de France, Jonas Vingegaard, for 2 years in a row, spanked him. Absolutely. Up until this year, Pogacar had not dropped Jonas Vingegaard on a climb in the Tour de France and had been beaten roundly in time trials. Jonas Vingegaard nearly died in April. I mean, he shouldn't have even been at the start line at the Tour de France. And yet he finished in second place to Pogacar. Now, if those two absolute specimens come to the start line of next year's Tour de France, both of them in form without having to overcome injury, as they have done in the last 2 years, we're in for an absolute showdown. But Pogacar knows that I don't think he has fair and square beaten Vingegaard yet, because Vingegaard was half the rider that he should have been.
I think it has worked out really well for Pogacar because he needed a confidence boost, and he has definitely got it this year.
Yeah, he's got it.
So next year, It is. Well, I think we are in for a hell of a treat at the Tour de France next year, assuming everyone gets there fit and fresh and ready to race.
Yeah, I think let's just hope that happens and
Yes.
take it from there.
Yeah.
Yeah.